Quran, Surah 79, on Naziat, those who drag forth. By those angels stripping out evil souls harshly, and those pulling out good souls gently, and those gliding through heaven swiftly, and those taking the lead vigorously, and those conducting affairs obediently. Consider the day when the quaking blast will come to pass, followed by a second blast. The deniers' hearts on that day will be trembling in horror, with their eyes downcast. But now they ask mockingly, will we really be restored to our former state, even after we have been reduced to decayed bones? Adding, then such a return would be a total loss for us. But indeed, it will take only one mighty blast, and at once they will be above ground. Has the story of Moses reached you, O prophet? His Lord called him in the sacred valley of Ṭuwa, commanding, go to Pharaoh, for he has truly transgressed all bounds, and say, would you be willing to purify yourself, and let me guide you to your Lord, so that you will be in awe of him? Then Moses showed him the great sign. But he denied and disobeyed Allah, then turned his back, striving against the truth. Then he summoned his people and called out, saying, I am your Lord, the Most High. So Allah overtook him, making him an example in this life and the next. Surely in this is a lesson for whoever stands in awe of Allah. Which is harder to create, you or the sky? He built it, raising it high and forming it flawlessly. He dimmed its night and brought forth its daylight. As for the earth, he spread it out as well, bringing forth its water and pastures and setting the mountains firmly upon it, all as a means of sustenance for you and your animals. But when the supreme disaster comes to pass, the day every person will remember all their striving, and the hellfire will be displayed for all to see. Then, as for those who transgressed and preferred the fleeting life of this world, the hellfire will certainly be their home. And as for those who were in awe of standing before their Lord and restrained themselves from evil desires, paradise will certainly be their home. They ask you, O prophet, regarding the hour, when will it be? But it is not for you to tell its time. That knowledge rests with your Lord alone. Your duty is only to warn whoever is in awe of it. On the day they see it, it will be as if they had stayed in the world no more than one evening or its morning. And now the Arabic, as recited by Saad El-Ghamdi.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والنازعات غرقا والناشطات نشطا والسابحات سبحا فالسابقات سبقا فالمدبرات أمرا يوم ترجف الرادفة تتبعها الرادفة قلوب يومئذ واجفة أبصارها خاشعة يقولون أئنا لمردودون في الحافرة أئذا كنا عظاما نخرة قالوا تلك إذا كرة خاسرة فإنما هي زجرة واحدة فإذا هم بالساهرة هل أتاك حديث موسى إذ ناداه ربه بالوادي المقدس طوى اذهب إلى فرعون إنه طغى فقل هل لك إلى أن تزكى وأهديك إلى ربك فتخشى فأراه الآية الكبرى فكذب وعصى ثم أدبر يسعى فحشر فنادى فقال أنا ربكم الأعلى فأخذه الله نكال الآخرة والأولى إن في ذلك لعبرة لمن يخشى أأنتم أشد خلقا أم السماء بناها رفع سمكها فسواها وأغطش ليلها وأخرج ضحاها والأرض بعد ذلك دحاها أخرج منها ماءها ومرعاها والجبال أرساها متاعا لكم ولأنعامكم فإذا جاءت الطامة الكبرى يوم يتذكر الإنسان ما سعى وبرزت الجحيم لمن يرى فأما من طغى وآثر الحياة الدنيا فإن الجحيم هي المأوى وأما من خاف مقام ربه ونهى النفس عن الهوى فإن الجنة هي المأوى يسألونك عن الساعة أيان مرساها فيم أنت من ذكراها إلى ربك منتهاها إنما أنت منذر من يخشاها كأنهم يوم يرونها لم يلبثوا إلا عشية أو ضحاها.
This surah touches on some very familiar themes. Particularly if you've been with us for a few years, you've heard a lot of this stuff before. There's the reality of the day of judgment. It's heaven and hell. There's the importance of being good, of obeying God. And this format is pretty similar too. You have the poetic opener, the theme statement, the historical example, the power of God, the horrors of hell, and the wonderfulness of heaven. And even though this is a late Meccan surah, when this was initially said to the people, this was probably not new to them either. This all contains things that the Muslims had heard before. And this is certainly something we have heard before. So, why am I recording this? What's here? What is new in this surah? Well, like the last surah we went over, the most interesting part of this is right at the beginning. And that is almost surely by design. Now, these surahs do tend to repeat themselves in the middle and the end, so it's just very smart to grab people's attention at the beginning with something new, something interesting, something mysterious. Now, surahs of this semi-formula almost always do that, and this one is no exception. So I have a few things to say about some of the later material, but this will be focused mainly on the very beginning because it's new, it's interesting, and quite honestly, as a former professional writer, I just plain respect the skill, the craft. This is high quality work. And unique, at least the beginning of it. And that's another thing that makes this surah so interesting is, again, the beginning. Because when you read it in English, even the most respected Islamic scholars just cannot decide how this beginning material should be translated. And not only do they all disagree, but they are very humble about their specific opinions when explaining their translation choices. Now just pull open any Quran to the translator's notes about these first 5 lines. Now these tend to be very friendly translator's notes, charitable, shall we say, to other interpretations, because it's totally understandable why they come to different conclusions, and they know it, and they always say it. And the reason for this very consistent pattern is because it's pretty much impossible to translate artistic imagery like this. Now, one common example of this phenomenon, at least from our time, to kind of show you what I'm getting at here, this is something you may have noticed in music. Now, those of you who speak multiple languages, when you put an existing song into a new language, you have to change words, not only to make them rhyme, but also to attempt to convey the same themes. The themes as given by the artists at the time, who may or may not have had a concrete idea behind the words and rhythms of everything in the first place. Now, what do I mean by that? You remember Nirvana back in the day. Some of you may not. If so, look it up. Not Nirvana, the Buddhist principle, Nirvana, the band from the early 1990s. Now, this may get me in trouble with some Generation Xers out there, but his lyrics, Kurt Cobain of Nirvana, his lyrics were gibberish. Okay? They just were. Let's not pretend Kurt Cobain was some kind of wonderful tortured poet. He was not. If there was genius there, though, and I'm not saying there wasn't, it was not in the words as they were, sort of existentially, just as they were. It was in his ability to make you fill in the gaps and convey a certain feeling. Now, the music was great too, which obviously helped. But if you focus on the words, it worked in English. But imagine trying to translate something like, say, heart-shaped box into Arabic. It would be extremely hard, and frankly, it wouldn't work. Because who can really translate something that intangible? And from an artist that frankly did not know the language that you're trying to use. You translate Kurt Cobain into Arabic. He didn't know Arabic, and if English speakers don't really know what the heck he was talking about for sure, and frankly, he probably didn't know what the heck what he was talking about for sure, how on earth is it going to make any sense in an entirely new language? And you have a similar situation with Muhammad here, because by his own account, these were not really his words. So, like Kurt Cobain and his gibberish, Muhammad doesn't really fully know what God is conveying through him. So take that situation and then try to move that through the additional filter of another language. It's pretty much impossible. It's purely subjective and thoroughly uncertain and unreliable. Maybe it would work in Hebrew or another Semitic language, but I mean, come on, English? Not a chance. Now, just to make sure I'm getting this across, let me give you another musical example from our time. Well, sort of our, pretty close to our time for most of us. Certainly before my time, but contemporary. I'm talking about the Beatles. Now, if you ever heard the Beatles singing in German, as an example, which they actually did in the early days, it's a completely different song. And those are very closely related languages, because English comes from German. It has many of the same rules and concepts and letters and sounds. And yet, they just couldn't do it word for word. I mean, not even close, really. So imagine you're tasked with doing something similar and doing it from Arabic to English, as these Quranic interpreters are tasked with doing. It's so interpretive, this task, that right and wrong answers They're impossible. And again, the good translators will tell you that up front. It's impossible. So that said, let's get into the content. I'm going to repeat these first 5 verses that we're focusing on. I read them earlier. I don't expect you still remember them. Maybe you're some kind of crazy genius. If I were the one listening, I wouldn't remember them. Now, I'm going to give you the Mustafa Kitab Clear Quran. And I'll probably use that as the standard, maybe 90% of the time from now on, because we will be moving toward longer, more complex surahs. Well, not complex poetically. Let's just say longer. And I guess complex is a pair word. Let's just say longer surahs, maybe less poetic imagery and all that. Anyway, the point is, these will be surahs more fitting for the clear Quran, because the clear Quran is clear. It's terrific in the modern English vernacular, particularly if there is a story or a theme you're supposed to be following. Pickthall's great for like high imagery and poem and poetry and all that kind of thing. But if you're trying to tell a coherent narrative, nothing beats the clear Quran, at least that I've seen. So here are those first 5 lines. And pay special attention to who you think the subject of all this is. All right, here we go. By those angels stripping out evil souls harshly, and those pulling out good souls gently, and those gliding through heaven swiftly, and those taking the lead vigorously, and those conducting affairs obediently. So the subject is the angels and souls, I should say subjects. And the translation of this title, the title of the surah, those angels stripping out souls. Now that's the clear Quran. I'll give you a couple more versions here. Now listen to this one from Muhammad Assad. Same 5 lines. Consider the stars that rise only to set, and move into their orbits with steady motion, and float through space with floating serene, and yet overtake one another with swift overtaking, and thus they fulfill the Creator's behest. So this time, the subject is the planets, the mysterious yet strangely coordinated heavenly bodies that the ancients were gazing up at. And the title of the surah, Those That Rise. So again, you have a different subject here. This is more on the cosmos, the planets. And then, because we're kind of talking about sort of high poetry here, I'm going to give you the Marmaduke Pickthall translation, which, if you're new, this is known for its literalness and desire to maintain as much poetry as possible. Now, this is how Pickthall translates that. By those who drag forth to destruction, by the meteors rushing, by the lone stars floating, by the angels hastening, and those who govern the event. So who's the subject here? Or what is the subject? It's actually the angels and the planets. And the title of the surah, Those Who Drag Forth. So if you just look at those 3, and frankly, pretty much any other translation, this is what I'm talking about when I talk about the acknowledged disagreement between the experts and just the general difficulty, and frankly, is impossible this a word? Impossibility, that's the word I'm looking for. The impossibility of translating these passages. And it doesn't have too much to do with the Arabic itself. It's more about how related these translators believe that certain words are to other words in the text. And there's really no way to know that with any kind of strong certainty. Now, that said, if you still want it, I will give you a brief explanation of the Arabic here. Now, in the first 5 lines, the key thing to remember is that you're not getting any specific nouns. They're all non-specific, as in those, they, that sort of thing. Could be angels, could be souls, could be planets, could be some other thing we haven't even thought of. I read an interesting interpretation that the first 5 lines are actually a metaphor for 5 stages that the human soul must go through before it can be perfected. Again, one of a million takes on this same thing. Now, the opening line of this, the first word that gives the surah its title, it says, those who extract. Again, I don't know why I'm giving you another English version of it. The Arabic is al-naziat, those who extract or remove or take away, followed by garika, which means excessively, maybe violently. Again, apologies for my bad Arabic translation. This would be so much easier if I was just writing it. But it means it's basically a combination of those who extract or remove or take away, followed by something that means excessively or possibly violently. So take all that to mean whatever you think it means. The reason, again, for this is that the first 5 lines are all introduced in this sort of non-specific manner, which is why the interpreters fill in the blanks. Like I said, Nirvana's Kurt Cobain was an expert at this sort of thing. Now back to Pickthall. And what makes Pickthall's translation, again, we're on these 5 lines still, what makes it even more fascinating is that most translators, pretty much all of them, tend to pick a subject and stick with it for the first 5 lines. Now, Pickthall, he's all over the place. I wish I knew why for sure, but my best guess is he's doing the Nirvana thing. The Arabic wants the mind to move all over the place. So he says, well, okay, I'm going to make this, in English, something that just kind of makes the mind go all over the place. And again, you're free to do the same thing as well. There really is no orthodoxy here. When you see these lines, the idea of angels and souls is probably the most obvious thing to focus on. But I also like when the focus goes to the planets as well. And that's just a personal preference. I'm fascinated with getting in the head of an ancient person as they followed these things moving through the sky and what that must have felt like. And as in Assad's interpretation, these planets or heavenly bodies, they appear to suddenly overtake each other. And so you have this combination of both order and change, and it's just so dang interesting. And one thing that justifies this link to the cosmos is that the universe is discussed later in this surah. Now, in line 27, the Quran actually raises a fascinating proposition. Which is harder to make, a human or the skies, the cosmos, the universe? Now, I'm almost sure the Quran is expecting the cosmos to be the obvious answer to this question. But what a fascinating time we live in, because we're not entirely sure of that, are we? I mean, we can already create our own simulations, which, to the subjects in it, seem just as grand as the skies when we look up at them. But we definitely cannot create a human from scratch, even though we have the code, or at least we think we have the code. We're using the same DNA God has already created. But then again, creating the cosmos as we understand them, assuming this is the physical reality and the immensity of it, yeah, I'll concede that might be more difficult. Maybe. It's just more to think about from this very short and fascinating part of this surah. But we should probably move on here. Now, I should talk about the mention of Moses and Pharaoh here, because it leans into the greater cosmos theme of this surah. Like the planets, which seem mighty but are in reality ordered by and are under the jurisdiction of God, Pharaoh has his place in the world. But his problem is he just doesn't see it or understand it the way the planets do. When Venus goes in its orbit, it doesn't say, no, I want to go over there. It goes where it is told to go. But Pharaoh should be doing the same thing. He just doesn't. Like I said, this is flat out fantastic writing in that way. So here's what the surah says about that as a reminder. Talking about Pharaoh here. So Allah overtook him, making him an example in this life and the next. Surely in this is a lesson for whoever stands in awe of Allah. Which is harder to create, you or the sky? He built it, raising it high and forming it flawlessly. So you have a mighty being, a great king in Pharaoh, who will be brought low should God command it. And God does command it, because Pharaoh does not understand his place like the planets do. Pharaoh is not the mover. God is the mover. And Pharaoh is not moving at God's command the way the planets do. And that will have to change. All right. One more thing to go over in this surah before the end. Let's go all the way to the very last line, line 46. It's talking about time, about how someone's earthly life will seem, once the day of judgment comes and you're looking back at your previous life. Here's line 46. On the day they see it, it will be as if they had stayed in the world no more than one evening or its morning. And this is a fantastic line, just a great closer. But it's also something that we should all keep in mind, that everyone should be thinking about often, and something we tend to forget often. There is literally no comparison of what happens in this life compared to the hereafter. Literally. Mathematically, you cannot turn it into a rational fraction. Let's say someone is fortunate and lives for a century. That's 100 over infinity. That's not a real number. But what's even more important is that the denominator stays the same. I think we've gone over this before. And no matter what you do with that numerator, it doesn't change the end result. 10 over infinity, 100 over infinity, 1,000,000 over infinity. It's all the same, really. And the bottom number is always infinitely larger than the top number. And that's basically what the Quran is saying here. It's just a more creative way of re-emphasizing an extremely common theme in the Quran, that the hereafter is the goal. And what you gain in your earthly life is worth nothing without the hereafter, because your position in eternity is eternal. And therefore, at least in theory, it should be of infinite importance. And that part I mean, it's poetry. It's fascinating. It's great. But interestingly enough, that closer, it's not open to interpretation. It's not subject to whims of artistic interpretation like the openers are, that fascinating 5 lines that we just went through so much. The ending here, this is cold, hard mathematics. It's a fantastic closer. And it is the most important math problem for anyone, anywhere in the entire universe. And it always will be. Thank you, and I'll talk to you next time. Inshallah.